When you walk through London's financial district today, you encounter a fortress. This massive structure with windowless walls occupies an entire city block. Guards in pink tailcoats and top hats stand watch. People call it the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street. This is the Bank of England. We sense permanence when looking at this building, imagining it was founded by prudent gentlemen with white hair and gold pocket watches who believed in saving and thrift. However, this is an illusion. The Bank of England was not born from stability, but from desperation. It was not founded by a saint, but by a sinner. And it was not created to save money, but to print it from thin air. The story of central banking's birth is not about economics. It is about war and revolution. At its center stands William Patterson, a man who was part visionary, part hustler, and part pirate. To understand how our modern world of debt began, we must return to 1694. London then was a city of mud, smoke, and noise recovering from the Great Fire and Plague. Above all, it was a city that was broke. The desperate king? The King of England was William III, a Dutchman who had claimed the throne in the Glorious Revolution. He was a cold, serious man with one obsession: destroying King Louis the Fourteenth of France. Louis was the Sun King, Europe's most powerful monarch living in Versailles' splendor, commanding the largest army and navy. William dragged England into the 9 Years' War, a massive conflict spanning the continent with battles in Flanders, Ireland, and on the high seas. But war is expensive. 17th century warfare was becoming industrial, requiring thousands of cannons, tons of gunpowder, fleets of ships, and an army of 50,000 men needing food, clothing, and payment daily. England lacked the money. The treasury was empty. The tax system was medieval. The king tried taxing windows, salt, and land, but it was never enough. Soldiers went unpaid, suppliers refused to send food, and ships rotted in the harbor. In 1690, the French Navy crushed the English and Dutch fleets at Beachy Head. Panic swept through London. King William needed gold immediately. He approached the city's goldsmiths, the wealthy men of the kingdom. But the goldsmiths were tired of kings. King Charles II had famously defaulted on his debts in 1672, ruining many banking families. When William came requesting money, they demanded interest rates of 20 or 30% and treated the king like a beggar. The government tried issuing debt using wooden tally sticks, but you cannot fight a modern war with wooden sticks. They needed a miracle. The pirate's solution. That is when William Patterson entered the room. Born in Scotland in 1658 from humble circumstances, he was a man of immense ambition and restless energy. As a young man, he left for the Americas, spending years in the Caribbean. He claimed he was a merchant and preacher, but rumors in London said he was a buccaneer, a pirate. The Caribbean in the 1680s was piracy's golden age. Patterson certainly had the mind of a pirate. He understood risk, leverage, and that winning big required betting big. When he returned to London wealthy, wearing fine clothes and speaking fast with countless ideas, he was a promoter who could sell ice to Eskimos. He examined King William's situation and saw opportunity. The old borrowing system was broken. Patterson had been to Amsterdam and seen the Bank of Amsterdam. He knew the Dutch could borrow cheaper because they had a public bank. But Patterson wanted to go further. He proposed creating a private company of merchants that would raise 1,200,000 in gold from private investors, a colossal sum exceeding what the king could raise in a year of taxes. The company would lend this entire amount to the king, receiving 8% interest annually. So far, this sounds like a normal loan. But here is the twist, the magic trick Patterson invented. He asked the king for a royal charter with a special privilege, the right to issue paper notes to the value of the loan. Even though the company had lent its gold to the king and the gold was gone, spent on gunpowder and ships, the company could still act as if it possessed the money. They could print paper promising to pay the bearer on demand. Because these notes were backed by government debt, people would trust them as money. This meant the company could lend the money twice, gold to the king, paper notes to the public. They would earn interest from both. It was alchemy, creating money from nothing. Patterson called it the fund of credit. He famously stated the bank hath benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. Today we call this fractional reserve banking or fiat currency. In 1694, it was revolutionary and terrifying. Opposition and triumph. The establishment hated the idea. The Tories despised it, believing money should be based on land and gold, not paper promises. The Goldsmiths hated it because it would eliminate them. They warned this new bank would become a monster that would enslave the king to anonymous bankers. But King William did not care about philosophy. He cared about winning the war. He saw £1,200,000, a fleet of new ships, paid soldiers, and France's defeat. So he authorized it. The government passed the Tonnage Act of 1694, including new taxes on ship tonnage to pay the loan's interest. Hidden inside this tax bill was the charter for the governor and company of the Bank of England. Now Patterson had to prove his idea would work by raising the money. The subscription books opened on June 21st, 1694, at Mercer's Hall in Cheapside. The response was electric. London's first great financial mania. Merchants, lawyers, widows, and aristocrats lined up to buy shares. The king and queen subscribed first with £10,000, giving royal approval. The entire sum of £1,200,000 was raised in just 11 days. It was a miracle. The gold was immediately transported to the Exchequer and sent to the army in Flanders. Almost overnight, the war's tide shifted. English soldiers were paid, suppliers were paid, and the navy was refitted. King Louis in Versailles was shocked, unable to comprehend where this small island was obtaining so much money. He was Europe's richest king, but his treasury was depleting while taxing his peasants to starvation. England had discovered a method to access the future, fighting the war on credit. The first crisis. The new Bank of England set up in Grocers' Hall, hiring 17 clerks and a gatekeeper. They began issuing the first banknotes, large handwritten notes signed by the cashier. The merchants accepted them and London's trade flowed more smoothly. However, by 1696, the bank faced its first fight for survival. The problem was silver coins. For centuries, England's currency had smooth-edged silver pennies and shillings. Thieves would clip tiny rings of silver off the edges, file them round, keep the clippings for bullion, and spend the clipped coin at face value. By 1695, the average shilling had lost half its weight. The government decided to recall old coins and mint new ones with milled edges that could not be clipped. This was the Great Recoinage, a noble idea but disastrously executed. The government demonetized old coins before minting enough new ones. Suddenly, there was no silver in London. People panicked and rushed to banks to withdraw deposits. But remember the secret. The Bank of England had lent the money to the king and the gold was gone. They only had paper. On May 6, 1696, the run on the bank began. An angry mob gathered outside Grocers' Hall, waving banknotes and demanding gold. The directors were terrified. They lacked enough coin to pay everyone. They partially suspended payments, telling people they could only pay 10% in cash, issuing "I owe us" for the rest. It was a default in all but name. But the bank had powerful allies. The Chancellor of the Exchequer intervened, ordering tax collectors to accept Bank of England notes for tax payments. This was the master stroke. By making notes valid for taxes, the government forced people to use them, creating demand. If you needed to pay taxes, you needed a banknote. Therefore, the note had value. This established a principle holding true today. Currency value derives from government demand for taxes. Newton and the Mint. During this crisis, Isaac Newton entered the story. Yes, the man who discovered gravity. In 1696, Newton moved from Cambridge to London to become warden of the Royal Mint, overseeing production of new silver coins and solving the cash shortage. Newton took the job seriously, becoming a detective who hunted down counterfeiters and clippers, interrogating them in the Tower of London and sending men to the gallows. He understood that for the new financial system to function, trust was essential. This was the conflict of the age. On one side, the Bank of England founded by a pirate pushing for paper money and credit. On the other, the Royal Mint run by a scientist pushing for gold and strict standards. For 200 years, these systems existed in tension. Britain operated on the gold standard. The Bank of England could print notes, but they had to be backed by gold in the vault. The rise of the system. By the 1700s, the Bank of England had moved to its permanent home on Threadneedle Street, building fortress walls and hiring guards. It became the symbol of British power. The bank became the government's banker, managing the national debt. Every time the king needed money for war, and there were many wars in the 18th century, he came to the bank. The bank would print more notes, the army would receive supplies, and the British Empire would expand. The bank funded the empire, and the empire protected the bank. Patterson's system became the operating system of the British Empire, allowing Britain, a small island nation, to punch well above its weight and outspend France in the Napoleonic Wars. While Napoleon had to plunder conquered countries to pay his troops, Britain could just issue new bonds, mobilizing future wealth to fight present battles. In 1815 at Waterloo, it was British gold and British debt that defeated the French emperor. William Patterson died in 1719 in poverty. His great schemes mostly failed and largely forgotten. But his invention conquered the world. Other nations examined Britain's success and realized they required central banks too. Napoleon founded the Bank of France in 1800. Germany founded the Reichsbank. Japan founded the Bank of Japan. Finally, in 1913, bankers met in secret on Jekyll Island and drafted the plan for the Federal Reserve, the direct descendant of the Bank of England operating on the same principle. The breaking of the leash. The First World War was the turning point. The conflict's cost was so high that European governments could not pay for it with gold. They suspended the gold standard and unleashed the printing press. Once the war ended, they found it difficult to go back, having tasted unlimited money's power. In 1931, Britain officially abandoned the gold standard. In 1933, the United States confiscated gold from citizens. In 1971, Richard Nixon closed the gold window forever. Today, there is no gold backing currency. The pirate won. We now live entirely in William Patterson's world. The money in your bank account is not backed by anything physical, but by debt, by the promise that government will tax future generations to pay for it. Since 1694, the British pound has lost over 99% of its purchasing power. This is not an accident, but a feature of the system. When the central bank creates new money, it dilutes existing money's value like pouring water into wine. The system encourages gambling by making credit cheap and easy. The central bank encourages borrowing and business expansion, creating booms. We witnessed this in the South Sea bubble, the Roaring Twenties, the dot-com bubble, and the housing bubble of 2008. During booms, everyone feels rich. But eventually debt becomes too large, payments cannot be made, and the crash comes. When crisis arrives, the bank intervenes, printing more money, bailing out failed banks, lowering interest rates, and kicking the can down the road. The legacy William Patterson was a man who lived on the edge of the law, a speculator and risk-taker who built the world's most conservative institution. Perhaps it takes a pirate to understand money's true nature. Patterson understood that money is not gold. Gold is just heavy, difficult to move metal. Real money is trust, belief that the state will survive, the economy will grow, and tomorrow will be better than today. By transforming that belief into paper, Patterson unlocked modern capitalism's engine, but also unleashed a monster. He created a system where debt is essential. In the Bank of England system, if all debts were paid off, no money would remain. The money is the debt. This is why national debt never decreases but only increases. To print more money, you must issue more debt. It is a treadmill we can never exit. We finance our wars, welfare states, and highways on the future's promise, borrowing from our grandchildren just as King William borrowed from England's future tax revenues. Every time you tap your card to buy coffee, you use his system. Every time government passes a deficit budget, they use his system. We are all sailors on William Patterson's ship, a ship made of paper floating on an ocean of debt. It has sailed for 3 centuries through storms, making us richer than any generation in history. But the hull is leaking, debt is rising, and gold is gone. Some declare the central bank age is ending. They examine Bitcoin and gold buying by nations like China and Russia. They declare the mathematics does not add up and you cannot print prosperity forever. If correct, we are heading for a reckoning that will make the South Sea bubble look like a picnic. But if Patterson were alive today, he would probably just smile and tell us to double down, to launch a new scheme. Because for a pirate, the next prize is always just over the horizon. The Bank of England started with a loan of £1,200,000. Today, global debt exceeds $300 trillion. It is the biggest gamble in the history of the universe.